morning, everybody. This is Yin Yang with Morsels of a Thought number 1150. I hope I can be seen on my own site because I have been trying very hard. Yesterday, I test ran a few videos, and according to Facebook, I am actually broadcasting on both House Cat Tracks and Yin Yang, but every time I come back to an it says that I'm broadcasting to a public, but when I come back, I always find that it's only giving it to me. It's terrible. I don't know what to do. So I will just leave it alone. And I just noticed online that I have no lipstick on, so I'm going to put it on as we speak. Uh, uh, this way I look like I have lips. Otherwise, John Clark, good morning. You have no idea how long it takes to look like I'm not wearing any makeup. Took me 2 hours one time. Anyway, so good morning, everybody. Lizos Cantata, a couple of people that come on while I'm live. Good morning, Candace Richardson Solomon. Good morning, AC Rosita. Hope I'm pronouncing the names correctly. Mary Dogan. And here we are with Our Town by Thornton Wilder. We are in the part where she turns back on her way to her place. Mrs. Webb is headed toward the house after the wedding and turns back and speaks to the audience. So this is something called self-reflexiveness. In a play, they are performing for us, but then they speak to us directly. That is called self-reflectiveness. Self-reflexiveness. Reflexiveness. It is to say that, oh, we know that we are performing a play for you, and here we are acknowledging. So this is what it says to the audience. I don't know why on earth I should be crying. I suppose there's nothing to cry about. It came over me at breakfast this morning. There was Emily eating her breakfast as she's done for 17 years, and now she's going off to eat it in someone else's house. I suppose that's it. And Emily, she suddenly said, I can't eat another mouthful, and she put her head down on the table and she cried. She starts toward her seat in the church but turns back and adds, oh, I've got to say it, there's something downright cruel about sending our girls into marriage this way. I hope some of her girlfriends have told her a thing or two. It's cruel, I know, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I went into it blind as a bat myself. This is where they haven't explained the sex act to the girls that are getting married. That's what it means. In half-amused exasperation, she says, the whole world's wrong. That's why. That's what's the matter. There they come. She hurries to her place in the pew. Oh, they headed to the church. I'm sorry. Where did I put my phone? It just ran down. Okay, it's on the floor. George starts to come down the right aisle of the theater through the audience. Suddenly, three members of his baseball team appear by the right proscenium pillar and start whistling and catcalling to him. They are dressed for the ball field. The baseball players. Hey, George, yow, look at him, fellas. He looks scared to death. Yow, George, don't look so innocent, you old geezer. We know what you're thinking. Don't disgrace the team, big boy. Woo, woo, woo. Stage manager. All right, that'll do. That's enough of that. Smiling, he pushes them off the stage. They lean back to shout a few more catcalls. There used to be, stage manager says, there used to be an awful lot of that kind of thing at weddings in the old days, Rome, and later. We're more civilized now, so they say. The choir starts singing, Love Divine, all love excelling. George has reached the stage. He stares at the congregation a moment and takes a few steps of withdrawal toward the right proscenium pillar. His mother, from the front row, seems to have felt his confusion. She leaves her seat and comes down the aisle quickly to him. Mrs. Gibbs, George, what's the matter? George, Ma, I don't want to grow old. Why is everybody pushing me so? Mrs. Gibbs, why, George, you wanted it. George, no, Ma, listen to me. Mrs. Gibbs, no, George, you're a man now. George. Listen, Ma, for the last time I ask you, all I want to do is to be a fella. Mrs. Gibbs. George, if anyone should hear you, now stop. Why, I'm ashamed of you. George. He comes to himself and looks over the scene. What? Where's Emily? Mrs. Gibbs. Relieved. George, you gave me such a turn. George. Cheer up, Ma. I'm getting married. Mrs. Gibbs. Let me catch my breath a minute. George, comforting her. Now, Ma, you save Thursday nights. Emily and I are coming over to dinner every Thursday night. You'll see. Ma, what are you crying for? Come on, we've got to get ready for this. We've got to get ready for this. Mrs. Gibbs, mastering her emotion, fixes his tie and whispers to him. In the meantime, Emily, in white and wearing her wedding veil, has come through the audience and mounted onto the stage. She too draws back, frightened when she sees the congregation in the church. The choir begins, Blessed be the tie that binds. Emily. I never felt so alone in my whole life. And George over there, looking so, oh, I hate him. I wish I were dead. Papa, Papa. Mr. Webb leaves his seat in the pews and comes toward her anxiously. Emily, Emily, now don't get upset. Emily, but Papa, I don't want to get married. Mr. Webb, shh, shh, Emily, everything's all right. Emily, why can't I stay for a while just as I am? Let's go away. Mr. Webb, no, no, Emily, now stop and think a minute. Emily, don't you remember that you used to say all the time, that I was your girl? There must be lots of places we can go to. I'll work for you. I could keep house. Mr. Webb, shh, you mustn't think of such things. You're just nervous, Emily. He turns and calls, George, George, will you come here a minute? He leads her toward George. Why, you're marrying the best young fellow in the world. George is a fine fellow. Emily, but Papa. Mrs. Gibbs returns unobtrusively to her seat. Mr. Webb has one arm around his daughter. He places his hand on George's shoulder. Mr. Webb, I'm giving away my daughter, George. Do you think you can take care of her? George, Mr. Webb, I want to. I want to try. Emily, I'm going to do my best. I love you, Emily. I need you. Emily, well, if you love me, help me. All I want is someone to love me. George, I will, Emily. Emily, I'll try. Emily, and I mean forever. Do you hear? Forever and ever. They fall into each other's arms. The march from Lohengrin is heard. Lohengrin. The stage manager, as clergyman, stands on the box up center. Mr. Webb, come, they're waiting for us. Now you know it'll be all right. Come quick. George slips away and takes his place beside the stage. Manager clergyman. Emily proceeds up the aisle on her father's arm. Stage manager. Do you, George, take this woman, Emily, to be your wedded wife, to have Mrs. Soames has been sitting in the last row of the congregation. She now turns to her neighbors and speaks in a shrill voice. Her chatter drowns out the rest of the clergyman's words. Mrs. Soames, perfectly lovely wedding, loveliest wedding I ever saw. Oh, I do love a good wedding, don't you? Doesn't she make a lovely bride? George, I do. Stage manager, do you take this man, George, to be your wedded husband? Again, his further words are covered up by those of Mrs. Soames. Mrs. Soames, don't know when I've seen such a lovely wedding, but I always cry. I don't know why it is, but I always cry. I I just like to see young people happy, don't you? I think it's lovely. The ring, the kiss. The stage is suddenly arrested into silent tableau. The stage manager, his eyes on the distance, as though to himself. Stage manager, I've married over 200 couples in my day. Do you believe in it? I don't know. M marries, and millions of them. The cottage, the go-kart, the Sunday afternoon drives in the Ford, the first rheumatism, the grandchildren, the second rheumatism, the deathbed, the reading of the will. He now looks at the audience for the first time with a warm smile that removes any sense of cynicism from the next line. Once in 1,000 times. It's interesting. Well, let's have Mendelssohn's Wedding March. The organ picks up the march. The bride and groom come down the aisle, radiant, but trying to be very dignified. Mrs. Soames: Aren't they a lovely couple? Oh, I've never been to such a nice wedding. I'm sure they'll be happy. I always say, happiness. That's the great thing. The important thing is to be happy. The bride and groom reach the steps leading into the audience. A bright light is thrown upon them. They descend into the audience and run up the aisle joyously. Stage manager: That's all the second act, folks. 10 minutes intermission. Great. Perfect timing with the bell, too. I see that we have a few people on, and I will say hello again to all of you. Thank you for coming. Okay, see you tomorrow. Oh, Kinderhut.